Coach Brandon here today, and we're going to go ahead and talk about weight cutting 101. We're going to cover quite a few basic details to weight cutting and how a lot of people kind of mess it up and don't fully understand what weight cutting should look like. Now, first and foremost, I have to preface this discussion by saying that weight cutting is rarely a good idea. Unfortunately, it is heavily ingrained into virtually every single weight class-based sport due to competitive reasons. Unfortunately, when one individual starts cutting weight, everybody has to cut weight because there is an actual advantage to, say, walking around at 190 pounds body weight but competing at the weight class of 180. Because by the time you compete, especially if it's a 24-hour weigh-in, by the time you compete, you weigh 190, your competitors weigh 180. 10 pounds is a big difference, and that comes with a real competitive advantage, especially when it comes to MMA, wrestling, or lifting heavy-ass weights in some kind of strength sports setting. So it doesn't matter if we're looking at powerlifting, strongman, MMA, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. Doesn't matter what we talk about here. Every body weight-specific sport is very prevalent when it comes to weight cutting. Some worse than others, though. Probably one of the worst of which is wrestling. My personal background, wrestling is known to be terrible when it comes to severe weight cutting, and mainly what I want to say to preface this, though, again, is it's not a good idea. Now, when it comes to weight cutting, I really want to first understand what actually weight cutting is, because the people use weight cutting and weight loss, these two different statements, these two different terms, synonymously, and this could not be further from the truth. Now, we all have those things as human beings that when we hear, even if it's not that big of a deal, it makes you really upset because of personal experience with that topic. This is mine. This is one of mine, that is. I have plenty. I hate when somebody says, oh, yeah, you know, I cut 10 pounds of body weight loss the last 3 months. No, you didn't. You lost 10 pounds of weight loss, all right? Cutting weight is a specific term that is not the same as losing weight. Losing weight requires actual, or the intent is, actual body composition changes that take place over time through caloric manipulation, macronutrient manipulation too, but calories is obviously the main focus of that. So we enter a caloric deficit for X amount of time. We go for a body fat loss of ideally 1 pound per week, and after 2 months, we say lost 10 pounds. Great. That's not what weight cutting is. Weight cutting is a temporary manipulation in how much you weigh on a scale. There's no legitimate changes in body composition. You're not losing fat, you're not gaining muscle. You're not losing muscle, you're not gaining fat, ideally. So we have to understand that. In fact, we're trying to maintain our body weight as much as possible, or body composition rather, as much as possible, while temporarily weighing less on a scale by manipulating a few specific factors we'll get into here more in just a second. But we have to understand the differences, and we have to use the correct terms, not only because it makes me very upset, but also it really makes a lot of creates a lot of misunderstandings within the topic and discussion itself. Now, the first question I always get asked is, how much weight can I cut? And this is a very important thing to touch on. And a lot of individuals talk about weight cutting as in pounds. But if you as a coach, me as a coach especially, I have probably half a dozen to a dozen, somewhere in there, let's say 8 smaller female, high-level female athletes, a few of which are jiu-jitsu, most of which are strength athlete competitors. If you are bringing about suggestions on how much someone can cut weight the same as a 125-pound female athlete as you would a 300-pound athlete, that is a ridiculous comparison, okay? A 300-pound athlete may be able to cut 25 pounds in relatively easily as well. But 25 pounds for a 125-pound female athlete, that ain't happening. It really is not. And if it does, I'd be deeply concerned for their health. So we want to go in percentages when we talk about how much weight somebody can cut. Percentages is the correct way to go about things. And when it comes to how much weight someone can feasibly cut, it's not the same for everybody as far as comparing people of the same weight class as well. I'll get into a specific example here in a second, which really paints the picture or sets the understanding or stage for understanding here. But a few factors that manipulate or change how much somebody can feasibly cut before a competition are body composition. That's likely the biggest one. In fact, definitely is the biggest one. And we'll get into more in a second what that means. Weight cutting experience. This is a really big one. If you're a strength coach out there, or jiu-jitsu coach, wrestling coach, doesn't matter what we're talking about here. If you're a coach out there and your athlete is doing their first competition and they're thinking about cutting weight, the correct answer is no. Correct answer is that's not a good idea. Okay, so weight cutting experience is very important to factor in here, because the fact of the matter is that weight cutting is horrendous. It is a deeply disgusting and painful experience to go through, especially a larger cut. And if you have never experienced that before, and let's say you're a 200-pound athlete that jumps into a 20-pound weight cut, because that's what you hear other people do for your very first competition. Now you're experiencing your very first competition, hoping to perform your best while throwing in the additional variable of having to go through a horrendous 20-pound weight cut that's going to have implications towards training or towards competition, especially if you don't have experience in it. So weight cutting experience is very important. How much you can cut feasibly and not degrade performance is dependent upon how much experience you have doing it. So for example, for me, I can get away with a large weight cut. I've been cutting weight since I was in elementary school, which is not something to be proud of, not something that's remotely ideal. I've had some actual health consequences because of that. But the fact of the matter is, because I've been cutting weight so stinking long, I can get away with a very large cut, not degrade performance too much. My body knows what to do. I know what to do. But again, if you compare the same body, but a very different experience level, they should not be cutting half as much as me. Right? So weight cut experience very much matters. Weigh-in to competition time length is a really important one as well. Most of the discussion today will be basing it off of a 24-hour weigh-in, in large part because a lot of weigh-ins are within 24 hours, especially if you get into USPA, powerlifting federations, for example. And then MMA is obviously a really good example of that as well. But there's plenty of competitions that actually have 1 to 2 hour weigh into competition time length. So for example, wrestling is another really good example. If you're a high school or collegiate wrestler, you're going to weigh in at 6:37. You're going to be competing by 8:30. All right, you have an hour and a half, let's say, after weigh-ins to get refueled, get warmed up, and you're hitting the stinking mat. So there's very different amounts somebody can feasibly cut without degrading performance between these two time lengths. Within 24 hours, or having 24 hours between weigh-ins and competition, you can get away with cutting a lot more while having less consequential effects to performance. And if you have a 1 to 2 hour or even 3 hour, just a few hour, let's say, time to competition, you can get away with far, far less without experiencing degradation to performance. And also, why are you doing it? This is the big question that I like to ask. When we talk about variables that manipulate how much someone can feasibly cut, one of the variables I like to add in that not a lot of people consider is, why the hell are you doing it? If you're doing it just to get, let's say, or if you're doing it just to hopefully get first place at a local competition, is that really worth a horrendously large cut? Because the competition is going to be harder. It's going to present a bunch of additional factors. There's a lot of downsides to making a larger cut when there's not really a big reason to do so. But if you compare just wanting to be competitive at a local powerlifting competition to trying to set a world record, those are very different endeavors that require very different sacrifices to make the attempt to do something, to compete. So I would say why you're doing it's also a very important factor, because if somebody is going for a world record, if somebody's going for an MMA championship or something to this effect, obviously a larger cut may be feasible because you got to risk it to get that big or to accomplish that large endeavor. Now, one of the examples I like to give for body composition, because body composition is the biggest factor that determines how much somebody can feasibly cut. The big mistake that people make is they look at an individual that doesn't have the best body composition. They look at an athlete that's let's say, that's 220 pounds, but 25% body fat. And you look at them, it's 2 weeks from competition, time to cut some weight to make their weight class, and you say, look at all their body fat. They have so much body fat to lose, they can cut so much weight. This couldn't be further from the truth. They can lose a lot of weight. They can enter caloric deficit, change up their macronutrients, get a little bit more caloric expenditure in, and lose fat over time. They have much more room to do that. But when it comes to weight cutting, body fat doesn't mean shit. It doesn't mean anything. A lot of individuals look at this person and say, man, they could probably cut 30, 40 pounds. No, they can lose 30, 40 pounds, not cut. Okay, so when it comes to weight cutting, individuals that have more muscle mass actually present a greater opportunity to cut additional weight. This is something that very few people understand. So let me give the example of myself. And this example was written a few years ago, back when I was 220, now I'm closer to 240. But let's take myself as an example. Right now, or at this time I wrote this, I was 220 pounds with 10% body fat. So about 200 pounds of lean body mass. Now, if you compare the exact, if you compare myself, but completely change body composition, everything stays the same, but fat and muscle composition changes greatly. And you take the same weight, 220 pounds, but 25% body fat. The individual with 25% body fat can feasibly cut exponentially less weight. We'll get into a little bit more, or a little bit later, we'll get into exactly why this is, but to give you a little bit of an understanding right now, skeletal muscle actually stores a very large amount of carbs, especially within an adapted, well-trained athlete, stores a very large amount of actually glycogen, stores a very large amount of glycogen, but also stores a very large amount of water. We'll get into the specifics here a little bit later, but more muscle glycogen, more water within the muscle tissue presents a greater opportunity to temporarily change or manipulate body weight to remove that glycogen, to remove that water out of the muscle and have large reductions in pounds in body weight to hit a certain weight class. So larger athlete, well, I shouldn't say larger, athletes with more muscle mass is going to have a much better opportunity to cut more amounts of weight. This is also very important to note because, again, if you have an athlete in front of you that is 25% body fat, you have to factor that into the discussion of how much they can feasibly cut and ideally not perform or affect performance too much. Now, the golden rule for me, the standard number you could give, and I hate giving standard numbers for anything related to this, especially within fitness, within training. If I always get the question of how much protein should I be eating per day? There's so many different variables that alters my response. But a decent number for most individuals is 5% body weight. The most I would have the vast majority of people cut before a competition is 5% body weight. And 5% body weight is still pushing that. That's still a good amount of weight. If you're a 200-pound athlete, that's 10 pounds. That's a good amount of weight. But for the average athlete, 5% body weight, you can, if you plan it correctly and execute correctly, you can lose relatively easily. It's still going to be pretty shitty to do, but you can lose relatively easily while having very little to no effect on performance. Once you get above 5%, that's when things get hairy. That's when things get really, really hard, both for the athlete and their likelihood to perform their best. Now, keep in mind, though, that there's plenty of times where people surpass that, even double that amount. Me personally, I don't love admitting this, but I've cut as much as 11-12% body weight, and that's a large difference in body weight. I've gone from 220 to 197. That's a very large difference in body weight, and there's people that have been documented losing far more than that even. But again, the larger amounts of weight you lose, the more likelihood you're going to very much degrade performance. And the question has to be asked, if the point of cutting weight is to be more competitive, but in an attempt to cut weight, you degrade performance, is it really worth it? So there's a question we always have to be asking ourselves. Now, the factors that we're going to manipulate to actually achieve this body composition change, there's going to be 4 things mainly. 4 different things that we are going to be manipulating. Water and sodium, 1 and 2 is water and sodium, and that's by far the most prevalent, by far the biggest bang for your buck. Through water and sodium manipulations alone, you can lose a lot of weight, all right? Because if you think about it, our body is comprised of around 60%, it's widely variable, but around 60% water. So that presents a very large opportunity to temporarily dehydrate yourself and decrease the amount of water your body is holding. Now, sodium is another important piece of this that in water and sodium I group together in my explanation for a few specific reasons I'll get into here in a second. Now, the third manipulated factor is going to be carbohydrates. As I mentioned previously, our body stores carbohydrates, and we'll get into that more in a second, and we have an opportunity to decrease carbohydrate storage in our body to lose weight. And then lastly, one that's actually forgotten or not well understood is actually fiber. Now, we'll get into that more in a second as well, but by temporarily decreasing or altering these 4 different components, we can lose a very large amount of weight without even hopping in a sauna, without even hopping into a hot Epsom salt bath or doing many other tactics to lose weight. Without even doing any of those things, through manipulating these factors alone, we can lose up to 5% of our body weight. For me, for a 200-pound individual, let's say that's 10 pounds. 10 pounds body weight just by manipulating these temporarily the days leading up to a weigh-in or competition. Now, water and sodium is what I'm going to first start off with. And the reason these are paired is because they have a very close relationship to one another. The questions I can ask to kind of make individuals understand this is what happens when you drastically increase the amount of pure water you're drinking without having anything salty. What happens? Your body craves salt like crazy, like absolutely crazy. And many individuals experience this without even knowing it. For me, when I was younger, what I always noticed is, because there's a lot of nuance to the topic of hydration for athletes, and we actually covered this, I covered this in a recent webinar, and it's very important to understand the relationship between water and sodium and understand what true hydration means. But back in the day, as a younger athlete, I really didn't understand this, and I just thought more water, good, more water, good. So I'd rehydrate my entire workout with more water, more water, more water. Then all of a sudden, a few hours after working out, I wanted these barbecue chips so bad. I wanted any bag of chips I can get. And there's this one particular time, I remember I caught myself eating four little bags of chips, and those are excluded from my diet at the time. I didn't even eat that kind of stuff. I just kept eating them, kept eating. I craved them, like to an unbelievable degree. And as I got older, I realized it's because I wasn't getting enough salt. I wasn't getting enough electrolytes. I wasn't balancing out the water to electrolyte balance that needs to take place to optimally stay hydrated. So understand that these things are paired together for a reason, and we cannot manipulate water alone and expect a maximal result. Another example is that what happens if you eat salty snacks all day, but no water? No water. What will happen is your body will naturally excrete less water, excrete less salt, less sweat rather. But furthermore, you're going to really crave water like crazy. So sodium pulls water into our cells, and conversely, when you excrete a lot of it, it pulls more water out of your body to maintain osmolarity. So sodium alone is often overlooked and a very important aspect of our health. It plays a role in blood pressure, blood volume, nutrient absorption, and much more. And it's actually really important for performance. Not to go too off topic here, but a lot of individuals ask me, what are the best supplements for athletes? And they expect some very particular responses. They expect some kind of secret pre-workout, some kind of secret multivitamin or something to this effect. But the most common answer I give, or one of the most common answers I give, is simply sodium and electrolyte solutions. These things are unbelievably important for an athlete, especially an athlete in certain conditions, and considering there's so much misinformation about the status of hydration or what is optimal hydration, it's even more important. These two aspects, as I mentioned previously, will give you the biggest bang for your buck. And the basic idea of how we manipulate it and the effects of us doing so, we'll get into here in a second a little bit more, but that is the first major manipulated factor, or those two are. Now, carbohydrates are stored in two major spots in our body, both the liver and skeletal muscle. A well-trained athlete can carry as much as almost 2 times as much glycogen storage within their muscle compared to an untrained, unadapted individual. And if you're somebody that's well-trained and have a very large amount of muscle mass, again, this presents a great opportunity to lose a lot of glycogen, to lose a lot of weight. And the example I always like to bring up here is the keto example. The keto carnivore diet is a dieting strategy that has been popularized very heavily in the last 5 years or so especially. And there's some individuals that have had great success with it, but there's a lot of individuals out there that try it just because it's the new hot trend. Many like mid-40s moms and dads and things of that nature. And my own parents kind of fell into this trap as well. And a family friend of ours went on the keto diet, and after 2 weeks, he lost like 6 pounds. He was like, holy shit, this diet's working better than anything I've ever done. 6 pounds in the first 2 weeks. And he was just amazed by it. And then after that, he kind of got stalled out, didn't lose much more weight, and ended up not being able to actually adhere to the diet and switch back over to his previous diet. But the point is, he was so amazed he lost so much weight, but it wasn't actual body composition change. Rather, it was glycogen depletion. What actually happened was those 4, 5, 6 pounds he lost in 2 weeks was purely depletion of glycogen within the body. He didn't even enter a caloric deficit at the time. He definitely didn't lose actual fat. And when he did his in-body analysis, it reflected that as well. He just lost glycogen. And this is a very common mistake that people make when trying out the keto diet, the carnivore diet, or just diets that limit carbohydrates. They really are really happy with their success in the beginning, but don't realize that it's simply just a manipulation in the water and glycogen stored within muscle tissue. We also have to understand that for every gram of glycogen, our body actually stores 3 to 4 grams of water within skeletal muscle. And that's why when we're looking to manipulate our body weight, carbs and water are actually kind of paired together as well, due to the fact that our body stores 3 to 4 grams of water with every single gram of glycogen. Now, with this factor alone, or with manipulating carbohydrates alone, we can typically lose a pretty good amount of weight. Again, it varies greatly. There's a large range of opportunity somebody has to manipulate body weight with glycogen storage, just because of the variance in muscle mass and how well trained a person is. But 2 to 4% is usually how much someone can expect to lose 2 to 4% of their body weight with carbohydrate manipulation alone. Now, fiber is another one that has many misunderstandings. So fiber will be altered pretty much automatically just by depleting carbohydrates. So it's not necessarily a factor people specifically need to focus on all too much, though it can give you a little bit of a bump in a sense. But the misunderstanding with fiber is a lot of individuals think that fiber is almost a laxative. This really does seem to be the general understanding, or how I would label it, misunderstanding, that the general public has. A lot of individuals think you take fiber and it makes you poop. That's kind of the association people have in their head. But the fact of the matter is, this actually isn't true. If it was true, this would make no sense. But what actually happens with fiber is, when you take in fiber, the more you eat, actually, the more residual content it remains within your gut. Fiber helps keep you regular. It doesn't necessarily make you excrete like a laxative, like many people think it does. So what people oftentimes do is, by decreasing or eliminating fiber intake, they actually decrease the amount of residual content within the gut, and it makes it so that decreases pretty exponentially. And the amount of waste you have in your body is pretty darn exponential. It's over 5 pounds, and it does vary greatly, but there's a good opportunity to lose weight just by manipulating the content within your gut, the waste material within your body. So now let's move on to how to manipulate. So the first thing I want to touch on here to preface this is that I am not going to give you an exact rubric on how to cut weight. The biggest reason why is because ideally you wouldn't. For the athletes that I work with, I have a rubric, and it works very well. It's something that I've had a lot of success with, and I'll explain the gist of it here, but not going to provide you an exact rubric on how to dehydrate yourself and malnutrition yourself today. But first, we need to understand, we only need to cut what we need to. So for some athletes out there, they are sitting at 128 pounds, and they need to get down to 126, 2 pounds of weight loss. You don't need to throw the kitchen sink at it for this little of a weight cut. You don't need to do a huge water loading phase or sodium, or you don't have to mess with all these factors. If you only have to lose a small amount, let's say you only have to lose 1% of your body weight, stop drinking water and food a few hours before weigh-ins, hop in a sauna, you're good to go. Hop in a sauna for 10 minutes and you're good to go. Like, it's very, very simple, very, very easy. Don't make it harder than you need to. Ideally, when you're cutting weight, you're putting yourself in a malnutritioned, dehydrated state that is horrible for performance. So if you can mitigate that as much as possible, do it. Only cut as much, only put yourself in that position as much as you absolutely need to. But typically, what we'll do is, with water, sodium, and carbs, water and sodium specifically, we'll start a loading phase. 5 to 7 days out, it's more like 4 to 7 days out from weigh-ins, right? So this is the typical suggestion that coaches give when attempting to cut weight. They'll start to load or increase the amount of water and sodium they intake in the days leading up to weigh-ins. And the idea is, we're banking on a super compensation effect. And the general idea of what's going to take place here is that you are going to exponentially increase your water in a linear fashion in the days leading up to a weigh-in or meat. So let's say you're 6 days out, you start to increase it. Then 5 days out, increase it more, 4 days out, 3 days out. And then it gets to us, and with it, sodium increases as well to maintain decent hydration or good status of hydration. And then you get to a point where all of a sudden we cut out water. Or sorry, we cut out sodium, we cut out water, and our body gets used to, with that higher water intake, excreting or urinating a very large amount of water. It gets used to, it adapts to excreting lots and lots of water. And then once you get to a certain time length before weigh-ins, we cut it all out in a very, very sudden fashion. And what happens is your body continues excreting that same amount of water. It doesn't have time to adapt. You continue urinating like crazy, though you're not replacing it. And through that alone, your body will basically piss itself into dehydration in a sense. And it does get quite a bit more nuance in this, talking about the specific changes you need to make with sodium intake, with carbohydrate intake and things of this nature. But that's a general idea of it, is we're looking for that compensation. We're looking for our body to excrete water at an accelerated rate due to you drinking water accelerated rate, and then all of a sudden cut it off. But there's one big warning I have to give here. For some reason that I will never understand, there is weight cutting rubrics online, How to Cut Weight 101 online, that suggests that you do something very similar, but you actually taper off water intake in the days leading up to weigh-ins. So it'll be something like you drink more water, and then 4 days out you're drinking twice as much water as you normally would, and then 3 days out you go back to normal amounts of water. 2 days out, you go back to half as much water as you normally drink, so on and so forth. You slowly taper off the accelerated water intake. It gets rid of the compensation. You don't experience that compensation anymore. You don't experience that accelerated rate of urination that comes with immediately cutting it off if you taper it off. So this really doesn't make any sense. It gets rid of that compensation we're banking on to lose this weight. So that's one warning I always have to give. Do not slowly taper off. I don't know why that suggestion's out there. If you have actual experience cutting weight, you'll immediately realize this isn't the case. This isn't ideal. I would know because I've tried it before. And something I didn't mention previously is, with my weight cutting experience, it could be both a cautionary tale on what not to do and a how to cut weight effortlessly guideline. Like, I've done it very poorly and very well before. I can definitely give you some good insight on what works and what doesn't. One can expect, like I mentioned previously, though, around 3 to 5% body weight manipulation or decrease just by manipulating these factors of water, sodium, and carbohydrates alone. Now, additional cutting considerations. We are not trying to lose body composition, therefore we should not enter a caloric deficit in the days leading up to weigh-ins. This is also extraordinarily important, especially if you're, say, a strength athlete getting ready to compete. The idea is that we maintain all of our body composition, we maintain all of our muscle especially. But the problem is, a lot of individuals, when they look at the scale, they're 4 days out, they're in the water loading phase, they look at the scale and they're like, I've gained weight. I had to lose 10 pounds, I got to lose 12 pounds. So they start getting nervous. Their appetite starts actually getting affected as well. And all of a sudden, they're taking in far less calories. Their total daily energy expenditure is 2,500, and they're getting in 1,800. They're entering a large caloric deficit, and they're putting themselves in a position where they start experiencing muscle atrophy, and the time where we need to preserve muscle as much as possible and facilitate recovery as well as possible, which is, this obviously is going to have very detrimental effects towards leading up to competition. So this doesn't make any sense. Leading up to competition, we need to do everything we can when we're 5 days out, 4 days out, 3 days out. We need to do everything that we can to maintain body weight. We, of course, don't want to enter a surplus and gain, but if you normally eat 2,500 calories per day, that is your maintenance level caloric amount. You need to continue doing that in the days leading up to weigh-ins, and the only time you really go below that is within that like 36-hour-ish mark before weigh-ins. Then, of course, you end up stopping or reducing food intake, same thing with water. But leading up to competition in terms of days out, this should not be something that takes place. This can severely diminish recovery, severely diminish the whole point of cutting weight, and just do some very negative things for the body and performance. And that's a very common mistake that people make, very, very common. Now, another piece of advice I always give is have a backup plan. Ideally, you would manipulate these factors perfectly, and then when you are, say, 2 days out, you initially had to, 12 hours out rather, you initially had to lose, let's say, 5 pounds, and with the manipulations alone, you lost that 5 pounds. Ideally, it always works like that, but the fact of the matter is, It doesn't always. And plus, there's some unquantifiable factors that comes with weight cutting in terms of how exactly your body responds. So, especially when you're traveling and doing other things of that nature for competition. So, always have a backup plan. If I am competing in Vegas, I have called a local gym beforehand, days and days beforehand, and I've gotten a one-day pass to an LA Fitness gym that I know for a fact has a sauna. That way, if I am still 2 pounds over a few hours out for weigh-ins, I can hop on a sauna and do what I need to do. So always have a backup plan. Have a hot bath ready. Have a sauna ready. Have whatever backup plan you will need to get those last few pounds off. Hopefully you don't have to do it. Hopefully you never have to actually execute that backup plan, but always have one, especially when you're going for, say, a big world record and missing weight is not an option. You spent money to get there. You spent time prepping for the competition. We can't allow yourself to miss weight and not be eligible to hit the record that you came there for. Now, another really good piece of advice here is if you're going to, say, enter a sauna or even a hot bath, do intervals. Always do intervals and have a plan before you come in. So sauna, bath, whatever it may be, is one of the more crucial parts of this when you're cutting a large amount of weight. You're going to have to cut a few pounds at least if it's a large enough cut overall. And the fact of the matter is that you need to go in with a plan, because let me tell you, when you're already in a status of dehydration, entering a sauna feels like hell. Feels like absolute hell, especially knowing in the back of your mind you have to lose another 5, 6, 7 pounds, whatever it may be. So have a plan going in. I always have a plan, and for me, what I've always really liked is 10 to 15 minute intervals, 10 to 15 minutes in the sauna, and then a 3 to 5 minute break. And I'm just balancing back and forth between them. And typically the exact method I like to use, this is varied upon how much more weight I need to cut, but typically what I'll do is I'll go 15 minutes on, 5 minutes off, then 13 minutes on, and then 4 minutes off. Then 10 minutes on and 3 minutes off. And I just slowly decrease it as time goes on. And by doing this, as things progressively get worse, as things progressively get more uncomfortable and more dangerous, in all honesty, you end up actually decreasing the amount of time you have to stay in there, which makes it easier in your mind to actually get back in there. So just have a plan, though. That's the biggest thing. Have a plan and stick to it. But also, what I'd very much suggest is, if you're doing a larger cut, have a weight cutting supervisor, buddy, whatever you want to label it, okay? Because here's the deal, there's been many individuals that have passed out in a sauna or entered conditions that are severely harmful for health or even dangerous for death, and they have no one there to help them. I personally have been in situations where I can't even stand. I have to practically crawl out of a sauna. And in these situations, I needed somebody to be with me during that time to make sure I stay safe. So if you are doing a larger cut, if you are entering a sauna, have somebody there with you. It is absolutely crucial, not only to make sure for safety reasons, but also to be your accountability guy, to make sure you get back in there. Doesn't matter how mentally tough you are, you will be broken with a large enough weight cut, I promise you that. So always have someone with you when it's available. Now, additional cutting strategies are important to touch on as well. Diuretics are very oftenly used, laxatives, and then also things to help increase the amount of sweat you actually excrete, such as a sauna suit, such as sweet sweat. We used to use both quite heavily. But let's start with diuretics. So ideally, with these additional strategies, you do not use them. With the manipulated factors, hopping in a sauna, with all this stuff alone, you should be able to get done when you need to get done. But if it's not quite doing enough, if you need to accelerate things, diuretics, laxatives not so much, but things like this can be used to a benefit. Diuretics are something that I've actually used for a decent amount of success in the past. I actually always combined my own diuretic, so I would actually make it with dandelion root, black tea, hawthorn, and a few other things like that, and I would drink it as my last liquid. I get anywhere from 10 to 16 hours out from weigh-ins, depending upon what the status of the cut is. My last little sip of liquid will be a diuretic, something that, honestly, that combination is actually kind of tasty too, so it's actually kind of nice to sip on. But my last sip of liquids will be something like that, which can help excrete more, which can help with that compensation effect. Now, laxatives is something I would not suggest using ever. Do not suggest it, okay? There's plenty of people that have been 1 or 2 pounds heavy that have used it to a benefit. So it can be beneficial, but there's a lot of caveats. One of the biggest of which is when it lasts too long. This happens all the time. all the time. We're going to get into RECOMP next, and let me tell you, it's really hard to RECOMP successfully and perform successfully when you're still in the midst of the effects of laxatives. You don't want to have to wear a diaper while competing. I promise you don't. You don't have to bring extra clothes, and you don't want to have to deal with the extreme dehydration effects that comes with adding laxatives to things, the effects of laxatives. So, due to the fact that we have so many pounds of waste material in our body always, there's an opportunity for laxatives to help. People have used them to a benefit in the past. I personally would never, ever, ever suggest it, and there's a lot of caveats to using them. So the biggest of which is the dehydration that comes with it can put you in a serious health consequence kind of situation. But again, furthermore, they can last too long and absolutely screw yourself for your recomp or even your competition, having to worry about in the back of your head, are you going to have to shit yourself while competing, while lifting heavy weights, while grappling or fighting with another individual? It's not something that's good to add into competition. But again, there are additional strategies such as sauna suit, sweet sweat, things like this. Those can be very helpful. Back when I wrestled a lot, my weight cutting is changed exponentially. Now, as a powerlifter, as a strength athlete, when I need to cut a few extra pounds, it's sitting still in a sauna. If I have to, standing and doing air squats, that's about as extreme as I get. Back when I grappled, it was an air bike in the sauna with a sauna suit, with sweet sweat on my body, and a lot more activities because I was actually conditioned and adapted to do said activities. But that's also important to note, those can be favorable additional tactics to use. Now, recomp is the most important part of this. Once you've made weight, the likelihood or your ability to compete successfully is 100% dependent upon, or nearly 100% dependent upon, your ability to recomp. If you mess up the recomp, the weight cut could have been for nothing. Your performance will degrade severely, even if you did the weight cut perfectly. And that's what happens a lot. What happens a lot is people weight cut perfectly, do everything to a T, and the second they weigh in and make weight, job done, we're in the end zone, we won the game, let's leave. They finish, they get done, they weigh in, and they first have a big juicy steak or something to this effect because that's what they've been craving. This is just one of the worst decisions you can possibly have. And speaking of having to wear diapers for competition, speaking of having to have diarrhea and things of this nature, how you recomp can greatly put you in a situation like that or not, right? So it's very important to nail this to a T. Now, let me go ahead and give you an example. If you were stranded in the desert for days at a time, somebody found you, they brought you to the hospital, what's the first thing the doctor would give you? You're near death, absolute dehydration. What's the first thing a doctor would give you? Would it be a big juicy steak? Would it be some cereal? Would it be a stack of flapjacks? No, absolutely not. That'd be a terrible decision that put your life in danger. What they're going to give you is a saline solution. They're going to give you water and electrolyte solution. The reason why is because the dehydration is what we need to take care of first. This is the same thing we need to do for weight cutting. You're voluntarily putting yourself in a position where you're severely dehydrated. So once you can finally resume drinking, eating, and actually getting yourself out of that position, drinking needs to come first, and when it comes to drinking, pure water is a no-go. It's going to put you in a status of hyponatremia and can give you some very negative effects from that. So instead, we need to come up with a solution, a liquid solution that capitalizes on all what your body needs right now. And what it'll need is electrolytes, water. It wouldn't hurt to throw some little bit of quick digesting carbs in there as well. And some people like to throw in a little whey protein and things like that, just a little bit as well, which can be a benefit in certain situations. But the main things is water, electrolytes, and I also like throwing a little carbs in there, but it's a specific kind of carb that I'll get into here in a second. So, as I mentioned previously, water alone, terrible idea. What is defined as optimal hydration is the balance between water and electrolytes. So drinking water only, not a good idea. So, what I personally would suggest for most people is a combination of water, electrolytes, and some kind of quick digesting, easy on the stomach carbohydrate. The carbohydrate I bias towards is actually rice syrup solids. The brand name is, doesn't matter. So rice syrup solids is the way to go there. And the reason why is because there's been a series of studies that actually show that rice syrup solids have a real benefit to increasing the uptake within your body of electrolytes. It just have tremendously beneficial effects on hydration, especially when you're in a dehydrated state as is. So the carbohydrate I would suggest introducing is rice syrup solids, and then again having a good combination of water and electrolytes. For the first 45 minutes post weigh-ins-ish, that's all you should be consuming. All you should be consuming is that liquid electrolyte solution. That is it. So the second you're done weighing in, drink a good amount of it. Drink 10, 15, 20 ounces of it pretty much immediately. And then from there, don't continue chugging it. Sip on it from there. Have a sip every few minutes and just slowly get yourself out of this dehydrated state. And then after that 45-minute stint, after you've greatly improved your status of hydration, now you can start to eat actual meals. The first meal you eat, 45 minutes to an hour post weigh-in, should be easy to digest, quickly digesting, easy to digest, easy on the stomach, food that you're already exposed to, you already have experience eating, that is very much carbohydrate and protein dense. We have very little to no fat in that first meal for a few different reasons. Now, once you get that first meal in, you're continuing to drink your electrolyte solution. After about 2 hours-ish post weigh-in, your meal intake can start to return to normal. But there is a few different variables that can alter this, exactly how much time needs to go by from weigh-ins to post weigh-ins before you can start to return back to normal as far as food intake goes. But again, that first meal needs to be carbohydrate protein intense. It needs to be quick digesting. It needs to be easy on the stomach. The first 45 minutes, it should only be that electrolyte solution. The solution should be, of course, water, electrolytes, and ideally some kind of carbohydrate that's quick digesting, easy on the stomach. I prefer rice syrup solids. Again, plenty of studies that shows the beneficial effects to that on a dehydrated status, improving someone's hydration status and once they're dehydrated. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can source these materials separately. You can get a really good electrolyte solution, or you can get just individual electrolytes each, actually, rice syrup solids and then water. Or what some people do is they'll actually just get maybe a quick digesting carbohydrate and Pedialyte. They'll drink some watered down Pedialyte, some carbohydrates, and they're good to go. Or, a regression from that even would be watered down Pedialyte and a banana. These strategies work, but something similar to this is going to be ideal for post weigh-ins because, again, RECOMP is one of the most important facets of this. It can make or break how successful your weight cut is. And I think that's about it. That is Weight Cutting 101. If anybody has any follow-up questions to that, let me know, and maybe in the future I will post that rubric. But for now, again, ideally, people would not be cutting weight, or at the very least doing so very minimally.